Hounslow Road. In Wiltshire, at Warminster, the A362 remains closed for accident investigation work near to the Whitbourne Springs turn-off and onto the train. Services are a stand between Peterborough and Stevenage because of a trespass incident. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
You can be. Good luck.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
6 o'clock on a Wednesday, let me get us through the midweek slump with a cracking show alongside Peter Hitchens and Aaron Bastani. Tonight, Rachel Reeves excitedly tells GB News about an £8 billion investment for a massive Amazon data processing centre. And Tata Steel are getting £500 million of taxpayers' money to go green, of course, and save only 5,000 jobs. But there are 11 million people in the UK who could be working. So do you think Labour really have a plan to create jobs for you and your children in the future? And if you own a rental property, should the government be able to tell you who can live there, how long they can live there for, and even whether your tenant should be allowed to keep a pet? Well, get used to it, that's happening. In the last 2 hours, David Lammy has committed another £600 million of your money to Ukraine, whilst also weighing up whether we should be allowed to use long-range British and American missiles to drop on Russia. Why are none of these men talking about a peaceful resolution? Plus, American reporters are currently in Ohio trying to prove the existence or not of legal immigrants making kebabs out of cats. And it's all because of Trump versus Harris. We'll be sifting through the litter tray of the presidential debate later. All that to come in the next hour. First, are the very latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Bev, thank you. Good evening from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 6 o'clock. These are your headlines. The Foreign Secretary has announced over £600 million worth of support for Ukraine, while the US Secretary of State has announced $700 million. It comes as David Lammy and Antony Blinken are currently in Kyiv on a joint trip, calling it a critical moment in the war with Russia. Their visit follows reports that Joe Biden will lift a ban on British Storm Shadow missiles being used on Russian territory after Iran supplied ballistic missiles to Russia. Speaking after meeting with the Ukrainian president, Mr. Lammy announced the support package.
I can announce we will now also send hundreds of additional air defence missiles, tens of thousands of additional artillery ammunition rounds, and more armoured vehicles to Ukraine by the end of the year. But I am most proud of the unity we and our allies have shown in support for Ukraine. And that is why our joint visit today, the first joint visit of its kind for well over a decade, is such an important signal, because we both recognise what is at stake here. Not just the liberty of Ukraine, but the security of Europe and the security of the West.
Back in the UK, Rishi Sunak's reignited the battle against Labour on its move to axe the winter fuel allowance for millions of pensioners. Continuing his focus from last week's exchanges at Prime Minister's questions, the Conservative leaders pushed to Keir Starmer for details on the impact of the...
So are the numbers in his impact assessment higher or lower than that?
However, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer pushed back, claiming his government was having to clear up the Conservatives' mess.
because of the tough decisions that we're making to stabilise the economy, we can make sure that the triple lock shows that increases in pensions will outstrip any loss of payments. But before he complains about us clearing up his mess, perhaps he'd like to apologise for the £22 billion black hole.
Meanwhile, this morning, our political editor, Chris Hope, asked the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, if the looming October budget will be more bad news for pensioners.
We've committed to those bus passes, to free TV licences for those entitled, and free prescriptions. But we've also committed to the triple lock, not just for 1 year, but for the duration of this Parliament. And that means that pensions will continue to rise by whichever is higher, 2.5% inflation or average earnings. That means that pensioners have £900 more this winter and likely another £460 from next April.
Now, in the US, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have met again at a 9/11 memorial event in New York after facing off in their first and possibly only presidential debate last night. The showdown began with a handshake but quickly took a turn when Harris mocked Trump's rallies, accusing him of boring his crowds. Trump hit back, defending his popularity and attacking Harris on her immigration stance and economic policies.
She's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it?
Meanwhile, Harris blamed Trump for nationwide abortion restrictions and the Capitol riot while questioning his fitness for office.
Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War.
And what do you call a fish with a mirror? No, it's not a joke. It's called a blue streak. The tiny tropical fish might just know what it's looking at. Scientists in Japan have found that the blue streak can recognise its reflection and even size itself up before deciding to pick a fight. In lab experiments, the swimmers check their body in a mirror before going after smaller fish. Researchers think it could be a clue to how self-awareness evolved, with fish now joining an elite club alongside chimps, dolphins and elephants. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Bev.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Very good evening. Welcome to Dewbs & Co. It's me, Bev Turner, in for Michelle this week while she takes a well-earned holiday. Now, one of my favourite hours of TV presenting ever held was in the company of my guests tonight, Peter Hitchens, a columnist at the Mail on Sunday, and Aaron Bastani, co-founder of Novara Media. Do you remember, guys, when it wasn't long after the Hamas invasion of Israel, and we sat here, and you two were so amazing, you were so brilliant. I almost got lost in the conversation. I didn't even want to present.
It's really nice of you to say so.
So no pressure, but there's a very high bar tonight. And we have got a lot to talk about. I want to hear from you as well, gbnews.com/your say. Let's talk about jobs, because the Chancellor of the Exchequer was very excited today about an £8 billion investment from Amazon for an enormous data processing centre. Have a listen.
Today, I'm making an announcement of an £8 billion investment in Britain in data centres to power the digital economy of the future. And I'm here at a university technical college today, training up young people to work in those industries. I know if we can bring stability back to the economy, if we partner with business, then we can turn around our economy and make Britain better off.
They sound like absolutely thrilling jobs. Meanwhile, Tata Steel are getting £500 million of taxpayers' money to go green, but they've got to save only 5,000 jobs. Now, there are 11 million people thereabouts in the UK who could be working and aren't. So are these sorts of announcements just a smokescreen? Do you think Labour care about the jobs that you and your children will do in the future? Gary Smith, General Secretary of the GMB, has said today that new jobs and investment are always welcome. He said, but serious questions have to be asked over whether Amazon Web Services is a good company to celebrate. It receives hundreds of millions in taxpayer cash, while often paying limited amounts in tax. Meanwhile, workers in Amazon's warehouses are treated appallingly and denied a voice. Peter, let me come to you first. This sounds like a lot of investment in big industries that don't actually require many human beings at all.
Well, no, and they don't tend to pay particularly well. And the last 40 years have been jobs which have paid somebody enough to actually finance a family. And what's also gone is what a lot of people regard as the dignity of the manufacturing industry. People liked working in those big industries. Even coal mining, which was always remained a very dirty and dangerous job, there was a pride in it. And the destruction of these things, which wasn't entirely due to the Thatcher government, but had a lot to do with it, also had a lot to do, I think, with our entry into the European Union, led to a huge social change. You then have, alongside that, the enormous cultural and moral revolution during which the family life was completely changed in this country. The idea that a family would be a mother and a father and children has been almost completely got rid of and is no longer taken seriously by the government. They're not keen on that kind of family. They don't want to support or encourage it. So life has changed, and they've tended to think that a welfare state can somehow substitute for the family, which used to both raise children and look after the old. And it doesn't work, and it plainly isn't working. And then you have all again, this is a result of deindustrialization, the huge numbers of people who were paid. There was a kind of semi-fiction that people were actually paid, I think, invalidity benefits they were called, when in fact they were really unemployed. The benefits were slightly higher. They didn't appear on the unemployment statistics. It looked better on the figures than it was, and the people were better off than if they'd been officially unemployed. But it's really is quite shocking that we haven't managed to employ people in the way that we used to. And at the same time, of course, as we pursue a low-wage economy, which I think this kind of Amazon development is probably part of, rather than employing people who are already here, we draw in people from abroad to do these jobs. I think it's the most fantastic mess, and it's all the result of, well, not all, but an awful lot of it, the result of utopian policies of the left, which claims to be concerned about the poor in this country, but whose policies, it seems to me, leave the poor considerably worse off.
And I agree with so much of that, Peter, but of course we've had 14 years of Conservative rule. So
no, you haven't had 14 years of Conservative rule. You've had 14 years of modified New Labour rule. Under David Cameron, the Conservative Party accepted Blairite policies pretty much wholesale. And it wasn't particularly enthusiastic about them, but it operated.
Yeah.
So there hasn't been a Conservative government in this country of a genuinely Conservative nature, probably since the 1950s. But we certainly haven't had one during the Cameron, Johnson, Sunak period. I've forgotten several Conservative prime ministers, but then that's probably the best thing to do.
I mean, Peter says that we haven't had a true Conservative government for 14 years. And if we had, then presumably we wouldn't necessarily be in this situation. The economy is flatlined for the second month in a row, we learnt today as well. This government keeps talking about growth. Their solution is going to be economic growth. But all they've had so far is this announcement for Amazon for a massive data centre. And guess what? Data centres don't need human beings. They claim, even on the government's website, that this data centre will create 14,000 jobs. But if you read the small print, it says, in local businesses and part of the facilities management that we required. It's not talking about employing people. Why aren't they talking more about finding jobs for people, creating jobs?
So quickly on that, we've had 2 months of no growth. I would say to your viewers, your listeners out there, ignore the monthly data, ignore the quarterly data. You know what? Ignore the yearly data, because often it's reviewed and they say, actually, we were in recession when we thought we were growing, or we were growing when we thought we were in a recession. When the economy doesn't grow, the Tories would say, well, it's projected to grow. When it has grown, they say it's projected to grow even more. So I would say when we're talking about economic growth, you need to look back at the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. Over the last 14 years, the economy has barely grown. Right? That's just a fact. Month to month, I don't want your audience, your wonderful audience, to get an anxiety disorder, because that's how you get an anxiety disorder, focusing on this kind of data, which is constantly floating around. In terms of this particular investment, isn't it funny? You've got Rachel Reeves talking that I can announce today £8 billion. It's £8 billion of Jeff Bezos' money. It's nothing to do with you. I have really big misgivings about Amazon as part of a broader phenomenon, which is effectively US technology companies taking over this country. Now, this is Amazon. Of course, we think about Amazon as a place you buy goods from online, but actually one of their largest businesses is AWS, which is web services for websites. So GBNews or NavarroMedia.com, or even actually large parts of the government's own websites, gov.uk, are based on AWS. Why does Amazon do this? It makes lots of money. And what it means is that every month, millions of pounds float over the Atlantic from here to California in particular, or actually in the case of Amazon, another state, I can't remember where, to the United States. And it's not just Amazon that's the case with. Every time you make a transaction with Visa or MasterCard, a tiny percentage of that transaction floats across the Atlantic. Apple Pay. Every time you are using a Meta product like Instagram or Facebook. Every time you use Adobe. So this might go out as a clip online. If it goes out as a video clip, they've used Adobe software. Again, it's pay to play. It's a rental product. There are so many of these products now which are American-owned and that we depend on, including AWS, and it's really a form of rentierism. It's almost like Amazon is the landlord for all of the goods and services that we depend on as a national economy. So my big criticism is, build a data centre, why isn't it a British company? And that's a much bigger question.
Well, why isn't it a British company? Is that the kind of industry that we just haven't transitioned into? I mean, Rishi Sunak, every time he stood on stage, he was talking about how AI was going to be the solution to all of our problems. All I can see is AI taking away jobs. And Tata Steel, you know, yes, it's getting half £1 billion from the taxpayer, but even that isn't going to create many jobs.
Well, there was a long period when it was believed by most Western governments that more and greater cooperation between countries, lower and lower tariff barriers, lower and lower restrictions on goods and services coming across borders would be a good thing. And in some ways, of course, it is. But in other ways, it isn't. And the long-term consequences of it for a country which was formerly an actual country which could enforce its own laws and run its own economy, that's really gone now. I think a lot of what Aaron says is absolutely true. The takeover of our economy by foreign investment, the number of things which we buy under what appear to be British brand names, which are actually American-owned, is astounding. And we don't really have much of an independent economy in many ways anymore, and I don't know how you could get back to it. I am myself a protectionist. I think that it's worth sometimes paying the price of protecting your economy from foreign competition. And it's interesting that the only area in which most major countries can do this now is in their defence and military industries, which are allowed to operate reasonably independently under special rules. And they tend to flourish in ways which other parts of the economy don't. And look what's happened to our steel industry. It's just disappearing.
Yeah.
And I don't think a serious country can exist without its own steel industry. It's just totally strategically necessary. And I'm astonished that governments are willing, for instance, to accept ridiculous arguments that you don't need blast furnaces. You have to have blast furnaces, or you're not making steel.
Well, I mean, look, we're clear we're at a massive turning point in history in terms of jobs. There's just no doubt about it. This is the industrial revolution that we're in. Give me a job of the future, Peter. You've got a teenager watching this and they think, which way do I go and study? What's going to be a job of the future that's guaranteed?
Well, I don't know. All the Americans keep saying what you need to do is either insist that your children become plumbers, or that they learn to code.
Oh, that's boring.
I can neither fix a pipe or code.
Right,
so it's all over for me.
They've also got no concentration. A job of the future, Aaron, that's not going anywhere?
I'll give you two for the UK. Medical healthcare, people are getting older, and viticulture. Because of climate change, our climate is changing more favourably towards wine. That is a growth industry for this country. It's true.
We're all going to be so depressed.
The Hampshire wine industry will be rivaling Burgundy before we know where we are.
Which you mean we'll all be sat at home on universal basic income.
Drinking British wine.
Drinking British wine. OK, not all bad,
Not all bad, yeah.
Right, listen, let us know what you think. What are the jobs of the future? What will still exist? GBNews.com/your say. But still to come as Labour bring in their new rental reform bill. Should the government control what you do with your property, who you put in there, and even whether they can have a pet? Don't go anywhere.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Good morning, everybody. I honestly don't think Gen Z are as lazy as we've been made out. I was on GB News a couple of months ago talking about a report which suggested that they were very lazy, very work shy, and I honestly don't think that's the case. I respect my elders, so I'm certainly not going to sit here and blame them for the slow return to many offices across the country. But I am actually 20. I've run businesses since I was 15 and 16, since I dropped out of school, and I have always been pro-office, right? So I fit right into that Generation Z category, and I think the office environment is fantastic, not just professionally but socially for young people, especially kind of after COVID, and it halted a lot of their social plans or people going to university, etc. I think getting people into the office, being surrounded by the more senior people, the people with more experience, which is what we're talking about, older people, is actually incredibly positive. But I think Generation Z get a lot of stick in the media, and I'm often sat here debating this about them being called lazy. I guess I think probably what's different is technology is advanced, so people's jobs are a lot quicker, and Generation Z have obviously grew up with that technology, therefore in a position to do jobs quicker. And I guess that's kind of where that kind of narrative has come from, because Gen Z do really kind of go with the whole work smarter, not harder kind of mentality, which is often met with a little bit of stick.
I'm not knocking the young generation at all. I mean, I'm just saying it's by experience. Undoubtedly, they're not as hard-working as the more experienced worker, but I'm certainly not knocking them on that basis. If they had the opportunity, I'm sure there'd be more and more would want to get into the workplace. But unfortunately, I think this COVID has changed the world, and it's made younger people more lazy than older people. Older people just can't wait to, well, shouldn't say that, can't wait to get out of the house to get to work.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We were just talking before the break about what people might want to do in the future. Charlotte said I'd advise teenagers to become tattoo artists. I think she's probably right. Hate that, but I think she's probably right. But you've not got a tattoo, have you?
No, I would not advise that at all. I think the less tattooing there is, the better.
I agree. Now, the renters...
Well, they're going to run out of space too soon, aren't they? There just isn't going to be any more space.
Finite canvas. Right, the Renters' Rights Bill is set to be introduced today, promising protection for the country's 11 million renters, with the government saying legislation, including a blanket ban on no-fault evictions, will create a, quote, level playing field between tenants and landlords. Should there be a level playing field between tenants and landlords? If you own a property, should the government be able to tell you who should or shouldn't stay in there and whether they can have a pet? Aaron Bastani. If I've got a house I'm renting out, it's got nothing to do with the government, who I choose to put in there, or whether that person can have a cat or a dog.
I think these are perfectly sensible reforms. I think getting rid of Section 21 evictions is very reasonable.
That's the no-fault evictions.
Yeah, I do think at the very least that's really, really reasonable. You know, I know of people in London, parents, and they basically have to leave at the drop of the hat because they made a complaint about the heating not working, and I just don't think that's a way for a civilised country to carry on. And
It's your house. If it's your house, you should surely be able to say, I'm going to change the tenant.
But if there's a child there, we're complaining in this country that the birth rate's too low. It's now something like 1.4. Who would raise a family under those conditions? I know what you're saying. At the end of the day, people should be able to dispense and dispose of their property as they see fit. But also, there are major consequences of policy as it stands. And I honestly don't think this is particularly radical. I think it's really welcome. I think getting rid of Section 21 is very sensible. I would like to see a default of 2-year tenancies. Obviously, you have a notice period from either side. You have reasons for breach of contract. But I think making that the norm is good. Also, one of the changes is you can only raise rent once every year. I think that's sensible. I think all of us out there with a mobile phone contract, we think we've paid the contract, we think we're going to pay so much a month, and then actually 8 months or 10 months or 12 months into the contract it goes up. You think, what? I've got a 2-year contract. How does that work? I thought a contract is a contract. And I think the same applies here, really.
But what if the landlord's mortgage goes up? It's not like O2 or Vodafone. Like, they can absorb some costs. Like, if your mortgage goes up because the interest rates as a landlord, and as the owner, and you can't pay that, you have to say to your tenants, I'm really sorry, I've got to put the rent up.
So what if interest rates go down? You're going to cut the rent?
You might want to.
In 12 months? I mean, you
might, but surely you should be free to make that decision yourself.
I think doing it once every 12 months, I think, is reasonable. And on the pets thing, I quite like pets. I think people pay a deposit. If obviously the pet does any damage to the house, you might want to charge more for the deposit. Right now, the norm is 4 to 6 weeks. You might say, well, if you want a pet, it's going to be 8 weeks. I mean, these are details that people can work out.
Without the government being involved.
I think that's a sensible thing to do.
Surely.
Well, I've thought for a long time that we needed a better rental sector in this country because not everybody can afford, especially now, can afford to buy. And the great pressure which was on all of us when I was starting work to buy rather than anything else was enormous. And I always rather admired the Germans for continuing to rent a lot. I think they have a fairly strongly regulated rental sector. But if you overdo it, which was certainly the case in this country in the 60s and 70s, with all kinds of restrictions on what landlords could do, then the rental market simply dries up. People stop moving because they can never get such good conditions again, and landlords stop renting. I think pets is difficult because it's also a matter of what the neighbours think, and it's not, you could probably have particular buildings in which everybody was agreed that they could have pets. But I think it's reasonable for there to be some regulation. You pay an awful lot these days for rental property in any big city. I'm astounded by the rents that are charged now. So I think it's only reasonable that some sort of regulation controls so there aren't pirates in operation. Also, I do think just being evicted for complaining about the heating is wrong, and there has to be a reason for an eviction. And if there is a reason for an eviction, then you should be able to enforce it. But if there is no reason other than that you've taken against a tenant for complaining, that's not good enough, and there should be protection. People should be able to be secure in their habitation for a reasonable length of time. And say, as Aaron says, a yearly renewal of the rent, and perhaps a 2-yearly renewal of the whole thing, isn't actually that oppressive.
But isn't this? But it's.
I mean, I think what we really need in this country, and I say it every time the social housing comes up, what we really need is to rebuild the stock of social housing, which was destroyed in a very mistaken period when we sold off council houses, because I think an awful lot of people need that. It would be far, far better. One of the things which distorts the rental system very badly is housing benefit, which is an extraordinarily badly managed and indeed pernicious form of paying for housing, which costs, as it happens, more than the Royal Air Force.
Would you like to, I'm sort of surprised to hear you say Peter, sorry, but do you think they've gone far enough then? Would you like stricter restrictions on what private landlords can and can't do?
I think this is the bare minimum, and I think they've done that for a reason. I don't think they want to put too many noses. I mean, maybe your audience might disagree. They don't want to put too many noses out of joint. But I think that this is reasonable. Another one, for instance, is you can't discriminate against people because they have children or they're on housing benefit. I think this is the bare minimum, and they think, you know what, we can probably get enough.
So, but just to be clear on that, so what that means is that if you have a small house now and you say, I don't want tenants in there with children, you can no longer say that, even though kids can kick the skirting boards and drop juice on the carpet and paint on the walls. You're now tough. You've got a house, anyone is in it. Somebody wants to be in there with 6 kids, you're going to have to let them.
Well, I don't know the details of the proposals. I don't know if that's true.
Well, like you said, you can no longer ban a family. You can't say these rooms are available, but without children.
Well, you should be able, it seems to me, to make that provision. If people don't want to let to families with children, they should be able to say, I don't want to do it. But they can't change their minds midway. But I think you should be able to make reasonable conditions. I've been both a tenant and, when I've been abroad, a landlord, and there are things you need to be able to do, and that's not an unreasonable one, actually. But I think to be forced, if you're letting the place at all, to go beyond the basic thing of letting to people, to not be able to make any conditions at all must be wrong.
Does it just put people off being landlords, Aaron?
Yes, it can do, and that's
and is that a good thing?
Well, that is the problem with any restrictions of any kind. They can benefit quite a lot of people, but they may well mean there's simply less property to rent, and you have to make a judgment on how much to restrict it. So why I said there should be a public rented sector, which gets rid of a lot of this problem. I don't think the private sector will ever actually be able in this country to cope with the need for rental property.
Aaron, do you? It's a bit of a personal question, but do you a renter?
Yeah.
You own a house,
Yeah.
so you own a house. You're sort of that generation as well that would have been raised to think, well, maybe one way of increasing my assets in the future, as you know, into retirement, might be to invest some money in a property and to become a landlord. It's been for the last 30 years a good way of gaining assets and capital. Would you think about that now against the backdrop at the moment that seems so unfriendly towards landlords?
I would never have done it in the first place.
Why not?
Look, if say my father passed away, and you've got 12 months before you sort the estate out. So you might say, well, you might have a tenant there for 6 months or whatever. I mean, I would do it at such a low rate that it was effectively a social rent.
Why?
So I rented for 16 years in London, 15 years, and I basically had to move every year because of the awful conditions. Now, I know London is not the country, but renting in London between 2006 and 2020, actually it was 14 years, was awful. It was an awful... I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. So that's not to say all landlords are bad. There are some landlords were actually wonderful landlords to my wife and I, my now wife and I. But it's not a racket I would want to get involved in, no. And the thing about when you might regulate some of them out of existence, the thing that matters most for landlords is obviously that margin between interest rates and what you can charge for rent. And if interest rates go down, I'm sure, if interest rates go down 2% over the next 12 months, I don't think landlords are going to mind too much about this. Your problem is if you have high interest rates and you have more regulation, like you say, people might say, I don't fancy
Not
this.
worth it. No,
but
put
I
it on
think
the market.
We're going in a different direction with interest rates, I think.
Yeah, maybe. OK, right. Thanks, gentlemen. So, still to come. Foreign Secretary David Lammy has just committed £600 million of your money to Ukraine, helping to nudge the West towards World War III with Putin. Do you think you voted for that?
Evening, time for your weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Pretty cold out there this evening. Temperatures are going to fall further through the night. Yes, there will be a touch of frost, particularly in parts of the north in the countryside, thanks to the winds coming around this area of low pressure all the way down from the Arctic, hence why we do have the chill at the moment. There's a fair few showers still around this evening, but for many they'll tend to fade. We'll keep some going in northern Scotland, a few for the north of Northern Ireland, northern parts of Wales, northwest England, but elsewhere many areas dry and clear, and the wind's easing a touch overnight, which is why those temperatures will tumble down to 4 or 5 degrees in towns and cities, but rural spots, particularly in the northern half of the UK, likely to be close to or a little bit below freezing to start Thursday. So yes, a chill in the air tomorrow morning, and there will still be showers in the air as well coming in across northern Scotland. Still a fairly brisk wind, but not as lively and not as gusty as the winds have been through the day today. Those breezes will bring a few showers across the northern parts of Northern Ireland, plenty packing in across Wales, although the south coast probably dry, and a good part of England having a dry, fine and sunny start to Thursday, albeit with that chill in the air. Now, as we go through the day, we'll see the clouds bubbling up a little bit, but I don't think we'll see as many showers as we've seen through the course of today. It's still plenty for Wales and a few more coming into southwest England and across northern Scotland, but much of southern Scotland dry and large parts of eastern England and the Midlands also staying dry and dodging the showers with some sunny spells. But despite a bit of sunshine, temperatures on the chilly side. Similar values to today, but at least the winds tomorrow will be a little lighter. Lighter still on Friday, and even again likely to see more of a frost on Friday morning. Much of the country, though, will be dry and fine on Friday. We will see rain coming into the northwest. The wind's picking up here as well. That's a sign of a change. Things turning wetter across the north into the weekend, staying dry in the south, and slowly warming up.
the latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. A couple of stretches of the M42 looking really slow tonight. First of all, heading north from junctions 6 to 7 between the Birmingham Airport turn-off and the M6, where overrunning roadworks has closed off the inside lane. They were scheduled to finish this morning, but they're still underway. And further along on the northbound carriageway, one lane shut 9 to 10 towards the A5 to Tamworth exit and the scene of a two-car collision. South London, the South Circular at Dulwich, blocked off the junction at Croxted Road at the scene of an accident. In South West London at Felton, the Staines Road, the A315 closed for accident investigation work. In Wiltshire, the A362 at Warminster closed investigation works underway following an accident. And there are delays of half an hour on trains between Peterborough and Stevenage due to an earlier trespass incident affecting Grand Central, Hull trains and Thameslink as well. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
We were just talking in the break about what you should invest your money in. And Aaron Bastani said land. And then what did you say is doing very well, Aaron?
No, it was a criticism, actually. It was.
Now, come on.
I didn't realise it's a tax dodge, but grouse moors, you don't pay inheritance tax on them. So lots of people are buying grouse moors because you're not paying tax.
So you are going to basically invest in grouse moors for shooting and vineyards.
I would never shoot
You are
grouse.
so posh, Aaron Bastani. You are a proper champagne
The wine, definitely.
Right, Aaron Bastani and Peter Hitchens are still here with me. So, the Foreign Secretary was speaking just a little while ago to confirm £600 million of additional support for Ukraine. Have a listen.
And today I can confirm more than 600 million worth of support for Ukraine, including 242 million this financial year for immediate humanitarian, energy and stabilisation needs, as well as support for reform, recovery and reconstruction.
And seriously, on a very serious issue, the US and the UK are currently deciding whether to allow Ukraine to launch long-range missiles into Russia. The Kremlin have said that any decision to do so would trigger a response. So, Peter, there still remains, in my opinion, no clear strategic off-ramp at the moment for this conflict. What are Blinken, Biden, Lammy, etc., what are they playing at here?
Well, I don't know, and I've never been able to get anyone to answer the simple question, what are the strategic interests of the United Kingdom in pursuing its involvement in a proxy war between the United States and Russia on the soil of Ukraine? And nobody can answer it for me.
Well,
I absolutely don't. There is an American foreign policy faction which wants the United States to be indirectly at war with Russia pretty much permanently. That's their affair. If people in the United States want to maintain a government which wants to do it, that's also their affair. But I cannot, for the life of me, see why we should be doing this, nor can I see how we can afford it. Last Friday, the Daily Mail published an absolutely astonishing story, which ought to have been more widely followed, that the entire fleet of British nuclear attack submarines, that's not the nuclear missile submarines, the Trident ones, but the ones which are actually part of the fleet, are now in dock. The Navy doesn't operate, and many of our surface ships are also permanently in dock. They don't move. They're in permanent refit, or just nothing happens to them, or they're broken down. We don't actually have, to all intents and purposes, a Navy. Therefore, our own defence of our own home islands has been neglected to the point where it will take many years and a lot of money and a great deal of recruiting and training to get it back into a state where we will have a properly defended coastline. And at the same time, we're spending enormous amounts of money promoting and continuing a war in which we have no national interest. Now, there is a fascinating discussion to be had about this and about the nature of British foreign policy and why we are always, over and over again, the fifth wheel in the American car. But it is not had, and it is actually quite astonishing that if you try to even question this, you're immediately accused of treachery, of working for the Russians, of being... Someone will no doubt be even now tapping away on Twitter or on your email saying, Peter Hitchens is a Kremlin shill. I am not a Kremlin shill. My interests are entirely in the defence and security of my own country, and I cannot see any purpose whatsoever in this. Then on top of that, the appalling carnage among Ukrainians in Ukraine, and indeed young Russians, being killed or disabled or disfigured for a war which nobody can explain. There's absolutely no rational explanation as to why this war is even taking place at all, and it was incredibly easy for us to have avoided it if we had wished to avoid it. But we did not. In fact, we did many, many things to help bring it about.
We also heard today that the British Army is currently constrained because we're spending so much time training Ukrainian soldiers as well, Aaron. Now, Peter's obviously not read the media handbook, which says that you have to say at all times that Putin is evil, he has imperialist ambitions and he's going to take over the whole of the Western world. Have you
He
read...
is evil, but he doesn't have imperialist ambitions, in my view. And if he does,
we don't stop
if he
him
does,
now...
he can't fulfil them because he can't even capture Kursk, which is about 40 miles from his own border. If he can't capture Kursk, I think the danger of him arriving at Calais is pretty thin.
Do you think more people are waking up to the fact that we're being sold a dud on this particular conflict?
Well, I think what you just said is obviously outlandish. If I was Lithuanian, I'd probably be quite worried. I understand why the Baltic states are worried. I understand why the Poles are worried. You know, this is historically a foe which has torn your country to shreds. But in terms of Britain, there is absolutely no threat or risk. Doesn't mean we shouldn't participate in a broader alliance to make sure that Putin doesn't invade other countries. But in terms of what Peter's saying around national security, there is none at all.
Well, can I just correct myself? I meant to say Kharkov, not Kursk. They are two different places. Kursk has been in the news lately, but it's Kharkov he can't capture. And he can't hold on to a piece of his own country around Kursk, which is...
That's right. I mean, you have they've had a massive mobilisation of conscripts to basically edge a few inches a day deeper into Ukraine. The idea that it's a threat to Western Europe. By the way, I'm very critical of where we fall short. The European Union and Britain is, 450 million people, some of the world's largest defence contractors, some of the world's most powerful industrial conglomerates. The idea that where we have a problem is energy. That's the big problem. And 2 years ago, we felt the pinch with regards to energy because Russia turned off the taps of gas into Europe. That is the shortcoming, and that's where we have a major deficit, and it's why we traded that particular commodity with Russia for so long. But on every other index, Europe is superior to Russia, numerically, technologically, the size of their militaries. So
they have more natural resources and more land than they can ever harvest those resources from. The idea that Putin has imperialist ambitions to take over more land is for the birds.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But it's repeatedly said, and people say, well, he said it in such and such a speech. And I once had a Twitter argument with a very noted liberal left journalist. And I said to him, you keep saying this, but could you please point me to the passage in the speech where he says this? And of course, he couldn't. He said, well, it's on Google, or he didn't know. He'd taken it as read, and then he'd frantically tried to find it and discovered, as everybody does who tries to find it, it's not there. It's not what this is about. I'm not saying that there isn't a purpose for it, but the idea that Russia is trying to reconquer the areas which it lost at the end of the Cold War is fatuous. Some of them might like to, but they know they haven't the capacity.
But even on the eve of invasion of Ukraine, that speech that Putin gave, which was very sort of sentimental, and he's very much into the history of Russia and the motherland, etc. He was very clear about defending the Russian people who live in the Donbass. He was under a lot of pressure from his own people to defend people in that region.
Well, he wasn't defending anybody. He was making an attack. So, but
attacking them in order to defend them from the bombing that was already happening.
It's a long story, but the truth is that if someone tries to provoke me into a fight, then I think I would be a prize fool if I allowed myself to be provoked. Russia was provoked into that fight. Beyond question, there was provocation. Robert Kagan, one of the principal neoconservative thinkers in Washington, D.C., will tell you that there was provocation. It's not in doubt. It's ridiculous the way people call it unprovoked. But he shouldn't have responded to the provocation, and he should not have invaded Ukraine.
Even with NATO moving closer
with anything,
to the Russian border.
Invading sovereign countries is basically it's a criminal act. It's also a stupid act, which this country, the United States, foolishly engaged in Iraq 20 years ago. So it's not just them that do it, but whoever does it is doing something both wrong and stupid, and we must be clear to condemn that, because there's no international order if people are just allowed to invade.
The idea that it was unprovoked, though, I think we'd agree on, is it was absolutely
It was provoked,
ludicrous.
but you shouldn't. If I am provoked, I don't respond, and the same should be true of countries.
Do you think, though, that the British voter thought, when they voted for Starmer, that this soon into the Premiership, David Lammy would be giving Ukraine another 600 million quid?
Probably to some extent, because a big part of Starmer's political brand is to say, I'm not Jeremy Corbyn. I am part of the status quo foreign policy establishment, which basically means, as Peter so lucidly said a moment ago, Britain is the fifth wheel in the American car. So that is probably the only part of the Starmer prospectus where he was pretty clear.
But this 20... We keep hearing from Rachel Reeves, we heard it so many times today when she was talking in her, unfortunately, robotic way about the business strategy, about this £22 billion black hole, £22 billion black hole. Well, they just found 600 million to give to you. Like,
Well, it is extraordinary the way money is found for military operations. And
whilst taking it off pensioners this winter.
This is the case. But the advice that the Foreign Office will give to any new government, and gave to the Blair government as well, is always stay as close to the United States as possible. That is the advice incoming governments get. Generally, incoming governments are foreign policy illiterates. They know better, and it seems sensible to them, and they stay as close to them as possible, even if they're doing things which are actually crazy. And this is it is astounding that in this country we have not developed anything remotely resembling an independent foreign policy which pursues our own national interests.
Is there anybody that can call this out? Is there anybody? Will any of the trouble is the only person who ever tried to actually say publicly that maybe there was sort of some nuance that was being lost from this particular conflict was Nigel Farage, and he got roundly criticised in the media for being a Putin apologist. It's just the way to silence people, isn't it, instantly? There's nobody that's ever going to stop this. It feels like a train in motion towards
popular.
World War III.
It's popular. This country has believed for a very long time. It goes back really to the 18th and 19th centuries when we successfully intervened all over the world, particularly on the European continent and in North America, without anything really ever happening domestically. The first time a modern war actually affected this country domestically was the 1939-45 war, and even from that we were far less affected, say, than France or the Low Countries or Italy were. So there's still a feeling that this country can intervene in wars without any great cost to itself, and wars are quite politically popular here until they go seriously wrong. The Iraq War was initially popular. The Blair intervention in Kosovo was popular. The intervention in Libya, which was a catastrophe for the whole of Europe, was popular. And if you oppose these things, as I have done on all those occasions, you find out very rapidly how popular they are and how speaking against them gets you accused of being some sort of traitor.
Our viewers, sorry to interrupt you, people, our viewers said, Age of Reason says, our troops in Ukraine are training on the job. They are learning as well. And Lady Westminster says, no doubt, no one doubts that Putin is a dictator, but the amount of money and resources we spend on Ukraine is disgraceful. When our own people are suffering, the Ukraine-Russia war is not our war. A lot of you starting to say that, which is very different, I think, from when that initial invasion.
That is interesting that more people are saying that. I do agree.
Don't go anywhere. Things got heated in the US first presidential debate last night, but has it made any difference to the polling? I'll tell you in just a minute. Don't go anywhere.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
When I knew that I was doing this segment this week, I feel like this week was a real homework task for me because I'll be honest, I haven't been around Scottish food much in my life, but I obviously know all the obvious. And I thought I'd bring in a selection of some of, I guess, the sort of the quintessential culinary delights of the North. I mean, we have in front of us haggis.
I think we should begin with some haggis.
So, Michael, I've never eaten haggis before. This is going to be the first time.
Well, have you eaten anything like haggis before? Have you eaten anything that is made from the intestines of an animal?
I mean, I've had things like chopped liver and, you know, a bit of offal here and there.
Well, there we are. I mean, I got a great surprise. I was holding a great... When I was in government, I was holding a great party in Scotland, and I had a lot of Spanish visitors, and I was offering them haggis, and I thought that they would be astonished by haggis and maybe repelled. But when they ate it, they said, oh, no, this is morcilla. So, you know, there is an equivalent in Spain.
Absolutely.
So if I recall, and you've probably been mugging it up, which I have not, but haggis is made within the stomach of a sheep.
Yes.
And you take the heart and the lungs and some other part of the sheep and you mash it up.
With onions, oatmeal, suet.
Yes.
and it's stuffed into the sheep's stomach. But a lot of the haggis you get these days, especially sort of the slightly cheaper varieties in supermarkets, it's usually an artificial casing.
Oh.
You know what? This is actually quite nice.
I think it's absolutely heavenly. And
It's
to me,
very savoury.
To me, it's two things. Yes, to me, it's two things. It's both the taste and the texture. You quite rightly refer to the oatmeal going in there. So it's got this crunchy, granular sort of texture. Marvellous.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Juice & Co with me, Bev Turner, this week while Michelle is on her holidays. Peter Hitchens and Aaron Bastani, I'm delighted to say, have remained with me for the last 49 minutes and hopefully will do for the next 11, because we're going to talk now about the American debate. Trump and Kamala Harris went head-to-head in their first debate last night. Trump made some big claims about Haitian immigrants in Illinois.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
Now, she didn't really need to do anything, did she, apart from just laugh at him when he said that. But has it made any difference? According to a Snap poll post the debate by CNN, of course, so they are obviously a left-leaning media organisation, they said that only 4% of Americans would vote differently because of it, but they certainly said that Kamala Harris won the debate. What did you make of it, Aaron, broadly? You know, who came out on top for you?
I struggled to believe it was real. I was watching it in the early hours of this morning after 2 a.m. and it was like an episode of The Simpsons, made all the more impressive by the fact that this anecdote about people eating pets is from Springfield. So it was a rather outlandish debate. What it tells me is that, yes, lots of Liberals were getting behind Kamala saying she won, but also so were lots of Conservatives. So, you know, often you should not listen to one or other camp. We listened to Hillary's people in 2016 about how she was going to nail it, 99% chance of winning. The big difference this time, though, is I think Trump is struggling to gain momentum. In 2016, there was clearly a sense of momentum. I think most pundits, people in the sort of political media elite in the US, didn't think he'd get over the line, but there was something. He was saying stuff that the American electorate hadn't heard before. This time, there is not momentum. That said, it's still going to be, I think, really close.
Does it make any difference? We saw from the poll, didn't it? People's views are so entrenched, Peter, in either Trump or the Harris camp. Nothing's going to make
I don't think political debates make much difference most of the time.
No.
That one will be remembered for the cat allegation, for sure. And almost nothing else about it will be remembered, which is maybe his purpose in dropping that in. He probably thought it would be better if people forgot the rest, so it'll just be the cats. But one of the problems with British views in the United States is we see everything mostly through the prism of fairly left-wing British commentators reporting on that country. Telling us their view of it. And they don't tend either to know very much about or to understand the very large parts of America which quite like Donald Trump. So I think you always get an underestimate of the Republican or right-wing or Conservative vote in any assessment from British media. So I'm not, again, it's impossible to tell who's winning. I don't myself think Kamala Harris is a particularly impressive candidate herself. I don't like Donald Trump. But I think it would be unwise for people to assume that just because a load of British commentators say that Trump has blown it, that he has blown it, because there are other things going on all the time, and I think it might still be quite close. But as I haven't been there for some years, I'm basically guessing. But I would always say, be careful.
You see, I think it's possible.
With British commentary on American policy.
I think it's possible to see the flaws in Trump's character, which I can do, but still think I'd rather him be in charge than Kamala Harris come an election. I feel like he'll get stuff done. I feel like he could have the conversations with the likes of Putin that we were just talking about in a way that it will be a more measured kind of meeting of minds, maybe. Aaron?
Yeah, I suppose that would be one part of his pitch, is that I would have a very different foreign policy to the last 3.5 years, because, of course, he can tie Kamala Harris to Biden. Biden domestically has done some pretty impressive stuff. The economy has done pretty well. Foreign policy, the complete opposite. So I suppose that's where she is exposed. What Peter's saying about not looking at this through the lens of British broadcast journalists, who tend to be on the centre-left, right?
Yeah.
Print media tends to be on the right, centre-right. Broadcast tends to be on the left, centre-left. I think that's entirely accurate. What I would say is as well that Kamala Harris and the Democrats are at a deficit, so to speak. They can win the popular vote by several million votes, and Trump can still win the Electoral College. So these headline polls aren't always telling you the full story. Nate Silver has given Trump a 65% chance of winning the Electoral College. That was before that debate. So by no means write him off just because some British podcaster says...
Our nightmare must be a narrow Harris victory.
I have to write you two off now. Aaron and Peter, you did not disappoint. Thank you so much. I'll be back on Britain's Newsroom at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Here's Nigel Farage.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, time for your weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Pretty cold out there this evening. Temperatures are going to fall further through the night. Yes, there will be a touch of frost, particularly in parts of the north in the countryside, thanks to the winds coming around this area of low pressure all the way down from the Arctic, hence why we do have the chill at the moment. There's a fair few showers still around this evening, but for many they'll tend to fade. We'll keep some going in northern Scotland, a few for the north of Northern Ireland, northern parts of Wales, northwest England, but elsewhere many areas dry and clear, and the wind's easing a touch overnight, which is why those temperatures will tumble down to 4 or 5 degrees in towns and cities, but rural spots, particularly in the northern half of the UK, likely to be close to or a little bit below freezing to start Thursday. So yes, a chill in the air tomorrow morning, and there will still be showers in the air as well coming in across northern Scotland. Still a fairly brisk wind, but not as lively, not as gusty as the winds have been through the day today. Those breezes will bring a few showers across the northern parts of Northern Ireland, plenty packing in across Wales, although the south coast probably dry, and a good part of England having a dry, fine and sunny start to Thursday, albeit with that chill in the air. Now, as we go through the day, we'll see the clouds bubbling up a little bit, but I don't think we'll see as many showers as we've seen through the course of today. It's still plenty for Wales and a few more coming into southwest England and across northern Scotland, but much of southern Scotland dry and large parts of eastern England and the Midlands also staying dry and dodging the showers with some sunny spells. But despite a bit of sunshine, temperatures on the chilly side. Similar values to today, but at least the winds tomorrow will be a little lighter. Lighter still on Friday, and even again likely to see more of a frost on Friday morning. Much of the country, though, will be dry and fine on Friday. We will see rain coming into the northwest. The wind's picking up here as well. That's a sign of a change. Things turning wetter across the north into the weekend, staying dry in the south, and slowly warming up.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. On the M42 in the West Midlands, one lane remains closed off northbound from junction 6, the Birmingham Airport turnoff, up to the M6 interchange. Overrunning roadworks that were scheduled to finish this morning after continuing, not being helped by a breakdown in the queues between junction 5 and 6. On the M1 in Bedfordshire, one lane's closed southbound from junction 11 to 10. near to Luton, where a car's broken down. Very slow on the Hertfordshire stretch of the M25, heading anti-clockwise, with the inside lanes closed, 22 to 21A, near to St Albans, where a car's broken down. In South London, the South Circular at Dulwich, blocked by collision off Croxted Road. And in South West London at Felton, the Staines Road remains shut for investigation of Hounslow Road. And trains are at a stand between Newport and South Wales and Bristol Parkway and Bristol Temple Meads because of obstruction on the line. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinion.